What happens when you don't know who you are? Not in some motivational quote type of way, but I mean clinically. What is the result when every relationship in your life becomes the sole thing holding you together, and when somebody leaves, a piece of you disappears with them? Welcome back to the channel, y'all. I missed y'all. I've been gone for a little bit, but I was on vacation. I know it's my birthday the 7th, so I figured I'd take a little break, but we're back. I missed y'all so much. Did y'all miss me? No? Okay. Anyways, today we're talking about Benjamin Poindexter, better known as Bullseye. I genuinely think Netflix created one of the most psychologically interesting comic book villains we've ever seen on screen. His psychology follows a surprisingly recognizable clinical pattern. It's crazy. Now obviously Dex is an extreme fictional character, but the psychological framework underneath him is surprisingly grounded into reality, I'm not gonna lie. In my opinion, it's so realistic, it's to the point where I know people who actually act like Dex. So instead of looking at Bullseye as just another comic book villain, let's break him down in a psychological case study fashion. Before we talk about the violence, Julie, Fisk, or how Benjamin eventually becomes Bullseye, we need to talk about something way more fundamental: identity. One of the core features associated with BPD, or borderline personality disorder, is something called identity disturbance. Basically, in layman's terms, meaning not really knowing who you are. Most people, even if they're still figuring out life, have some answer to that question. Maybe one day your interests change, or your career changes. It happens, it's life. But underneath all that, there's usually some kind of foundation, some core sense of self. But Ben never really develops one. From the moment we're introduced to him, you could tell something's a little off about the way he interacts with people. He's hollow, almost like he's constantly performing with no soul. How he acts is too clean cut, almost weirdly so. He's the perfect FBI agent, the perfect patient, the perfect bodyguard, and eventually the perfect mirror of Daredevil. But did you notice a pattern? He's always becoming somebody, but he's never really himself. And when you look at his childhood, it's hard not to see why. Dex wasn't raised to understand his emotions, he was raised to suppress them. Every time something slightly overwhelming happened, the goal wasn't to process it, it was to contain it, control it, and bottle it up. That sounds great in theory, until you realize all you're doing is shaking up a soda can and pretending it won't eventually explode. Dex never had the proper foundation a kid needs to learn how to cope with complex emotions. His parents died at a young age, and he was left with a therapist who unintentionally enabled his behavior. Honestly, I think the therapist is one of the most tragic parts of the entire story. She genuinely helped him, she cared, and she probably saved his life more than once. But she also accidentally became another emotional crutch. She taught him strategies that are good for short-term regulation but won't pan out long-term. Most people eventually learn how to regulate themselves. For example, they use the lessons and a voice of a guardian to guide them. Eventually, those voices become part of who you are, but Dex never really gets there. He doesn't internalize the recordings, he keeps replaying them over and over and over again. So when his therapist dies, naturally he's losing one of the only things keeping him functional. Dex is left standing on his own, needing a North Star to show him where to go, which is how Julie comes into the fold. Now that we understand why Dex struggles with identity, we can finally talk about Julie. Julie's one of the most important characters in the entire show because of what she represents: stability. Think about where Dex is mentally when we meet him. His entire life is held together by systems, the recordings, the routines, the schedules, etc. Everything has to be carefully managed because the moment it isn't, things start falling apart. So when life does what life does and shit hits the fan, there's a void, and nature hates a vacuum. Something is gonna fill that space. So Julie enters his life. You know what, that's a bad way to put it. Dex pulls Julie into his life. And for the first time in a long time, there's somebody who gives him a direction outside of his basic needs. There's somebody who reminds him that there's more to life than simply keeping himself together. Everybody focuses on Julie herself, but the more important question is, what does Julie represent to Dex? Julie isn't really the point. Anybody can be Julie. The point is what happens when she's gone. There's a concept in psychology called object consistency, basically the ability to maintain emotional stability even when important people aren't physically present in your life. Most people can do that. A friend moves away, you lose contact with somebody, life happens, and while it hurts, your sense of self remains relatively intact. Dex struggles with that severely. When important people leave his life, they take pieces of him with them. They're his anchors, the only thing keeping him emotionally grounded, and honestly, this dynamic reminds me of another character I want to talk about eventually, Nikki from Obsession. Both characters slowly begin organizing their entire emotional world behind somebody else. They stop asking, what do I want, and start asking, what does this person mean to me? Once this occurs, the relationship stops being just a relationship and becomes part of their identity. And when somebody's identity becomes that dependent on another person, more times than not, there's always someone behind behind the curtain pulling the strings. Somebody who recognizes that vulnerability. Somebody who knows exactly what that person needs to hear, which is one of the reasons why Nikki and Dex feel so similar to me. Obviously, there are some major differences between them, but we'll save that conversation for another video. Unfortunately for Ben, the next person waiting behind the curtain isn't another Julie, it's Wilson Fisk. And unlike everybody else in Dex's life, Fisk sees exactly what's happening and decides to use it against him. One of the biggest reasons why Wilson Fisk is such a terrifying villain is that he understands people. Fisk understands people the same way a hunter understands its prey. He studies them, learns what they want, what they fear, and what they're missing, and when the time comes, he exploits it without hesitation. This is exactly what happens when he meets Ben. The second they meet, he scans something that almost nobody else does. Dex isn't looking for money or power, he's looking for direction. He's looking for somebody to tell him who he is, and once Fisk realizes that, the game's over.
We're taught to hide beneath many fictions. You fashioned yourself into something the world would tolerate. Julie never would have understood you. And society won't either. It punishes people like you, like us.
You see how Fisk talks to him? It's almost like the devil. He coerces him. He knows exactly what to say, how to say it, and when to say it. To somebody like Dex, those words hit differently in a way a regular person can't ever comprehend. To a regular person, the compliment would be surface level. Maybe they'll think about it for a week or a month at most. But to Dex, the simple compliments are giving him purpose. Remember what we talked about earlier? Dex spends almost the entire show attaching himself to external anchors. His therapist, Julie, anybody who gives him stability and direction, and Fisk understands that immediately. That's why I don't think Fisk ever really brainwashes Dex. That's giving Fisk too much credit and infantilizing Dex. What he does is much creepier in my opinion. He identifies a wound that already exists and starts pressing on it over and over. He knows from experience that people will do anything to feel seen. And most likely, for the first time in his life, Dex feels understood by a male figure. The last time he had one in his life didn't go so well. Naturally, Fisk doesn't care about Dex at all. He understands him because he's useful. From Dex's perspective, he finally found someone who gets him, somebody who sees value in him. And this is where we start seeing one of the most fascinating patterns in Dex's psychology. The moment somebody becomes remotely important to him, they stop being a regular person. They become absolutely everything. He puts them on these massive pedestals, and eventually reality can't live up to that image. Because nobody can. Once those cracks start to appear, the collapse is catastrophic. If you built your entire identity around somebody else, what happens when they disappoint you or betray you? You lose the version of yourself that existed because of them, which is why Dex's downfall feels so inevitable. Fisk found somebody who was desperately trying to figure out who he was, and he handed him an answer. Unfortunately, that answer was Bullseye. I find this is what makes Netflix's version so much better than every version that came before him. He's created by trauma, isolation, attachment, things that already exist and feel realistic, which brings us to our next and final pillar. One thing I absolutely love about this adaptation is that it made me appreciate a character that I honestly thought was dumb as hell growing up. This is probably going to be a huge throwback for some of y'all, but if you're Canadian that was watching TV around like 2008 to 2014, you probably remember Teletoon and Teletoon at Night playing movies during evenings and nights back in the day. When I was a kid, they put on the 2003 Daredevil movie a couple times, and I remember watching Bullseye as a kid and thinking, this dude is supposed to be Daredevil's arch nemesis, he's a jagoff. He was lame as hell, I'm not gonna lie. Don't get me wrong, Colin Farrell was entertaining as hell, but substance-wise there was nothing much there. Soon after I started reading some of the comics, and honestly, while comic Bullseye is definitely better than the movie version, he isn't particularly deep most of the time. He's funny and dangerous sometimes, but he's just chaos personified. He's crazy just because he's crazy, and honestly that's perfectly fine. Not every villain needs a tragic backstory, but Netflix decides to ask a more interesting question. Instead of asking how dangerous is Bullseye, they ask how does somebody become Bullseye? And that single decision changed my perspective of the character forever. Bullseye isn't where Benjamin Poindexter's story begins, it's where it ends. Everything we talked about up until now, his childhood, therapist, etc., it's all pushing Ben towards the same direction. He has to become somebody, and the tragedy is that every identity he tries to build eventually collapses until there's only one left. Bullseye, which is why I also love his portrayal in Born Again. Season 3 is about a man desperately trying not to become Bullseye, while Born Again is about a man who accepted it. Even look at his mannerisms, he's calmer, more focused, like he's at peace knowing he can murder people without consequence anymore. He's no longer trying to be normal or fit into society. Even in season 2 of Born Again, when he tries to atone for the things he did before, it shows that he finally found his identity and drew clear lines of what is and is not okay. He's finally certain, and he's certain that this is the path for him. Certainty can be one of the most dangerous things a damaged person can have, especially when that certainty is built around violence. That's one of the major reasons why I love and appreciate what Daredevil and Born Again do to Poindexter. They never ask us to forgive him or make an excuse like, oh, it's society's fault, etc. A lot of stories fall into the trap where they spend so much time explaining why somebody became the way they are that people start confusing understanding with justification. Daredevil doesn't do that. The show wants us to understand Dex, but understanding and sympathizing with somebody isn't the same thing as agreeing with them or condoning their actions. At the end of the day, Ben still has choices. They may not be easy or fair, but they're choices nonetheless. That's what makes him such a compelling character. The show doesn't reduce him to a monster like the comics, but it doesn't reduce him to a victim either. It's a happy median. Dex is a deeply damaged person, one who is failed by almost everybody around him, but he's still a person, and people are responsible for the choices that they make. Thank y'all so much for watching, family. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it's a little rough around the edges, but I kind of got sick again. Please like and subscribe, plus turn on post notifications so you get notified every single time I post. I'm back now and we going up. I love y'all, family, and I'ma catch you